Hey, what's going on, everyone? GoodMicWork Commentaries back at you with another classic pay-per-view review. Here we are in the month of January, and the Royal Rumble 2020 is right on our doorstep. So naturally, I thought I would come up here and give you guys a couple of classic Royal Rumble reviews for this month. It's kind of been a tradition. I've been doing that lately the past few years. Last year, I know I reviewed a couple of really good Royal Rumbles and did a couple of watch-alongs as well. So if you want to check those out, I'll throw links to those in the upper right of the screen and in the description below. This month, I plan on giving you two. This one here, of course, the big 30th anniversary of the big showdown between Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior at the Royal Rumble 1990. I have a lot of vivid memories of this show, and I cannot wait to share those with you. The next one coming up in just over a week, I think, is one that you'll like even better, because one of my main goals for 2020 and classic pay-per-view reviews is to target a specific time period. I've been noticing that on my channel, I've been reviewing a lot of shows from the late 80s, a lot of shows from the early 90s, and I understand that many of you might not be as interested in those shows as some a little bit more recent events because of, the overall age of my audience and things like that. So one of my main goals for 2020 is to target most, not all, but most of my classic pay-per-view reviews. I want to target the years between 2003 and 2009. That time period there is really heavily requested by you guys. You guys are asking me to do pay-per-views in that time period of years all the time. So if you have some ideas for 2020 and pay-per-views you would like me to do, please hit me with them in the comments below. Shoot me a follow on Twitter at GoodMicWork and hit me with them over there. And let me know your suggestions of pay-per-views from that time period that I can do in 2020, because I feel like I owe you guys a lot of those. I know I've got a Raw Homecoming show from 2005 on my channel. I've got the Survivor Series 2003, maybe a couple of other reviews here or there, but for the most part, I've largely ignored those years, and I want to do better about giving you guys reviews from that time period, since it's very important to many of you. So look forward to that coming up in 2020 on the channel. But as far as today goes, you guys are going to have to sit through one more 1990s pay-per-view. This one I could not ignore. It's the 30th anniversary of the 1990 Royal Rumble and the big confrontation between Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. And I remember this. I watched it on pay-per-view, and I remember how naive I was because I didn't see it coming. And they gave us all sorts of hints that it would happen, that we would see a showdown between Hogan and Warrior, but somehow they went right over my head. And when these two guys wound up in the ring together, it was pant-shitting time, for real. So I cannot wait to get into that later and to share with you guys my memories of where I was and how I remember this and how I perceived it and what my reaction was at the time. So it should be a lot of fun to talk about that. And like I said, for the next one coming up in just over a week, I think you're really going to like the Royal Rumble that I do next. And then right after that, I hop on a plane for Miami because I am going on the Jericho cruise. And I get back like 1 day, 2 days before the Royal Rumble this year in 2020. So I am very much looking forward to that. And I wanted to get up a couple of classic pay-per-view reviews on my channel in case there's a gap there between videos when I'm on the cruise. So anyway, today, like I said, we're going to talk about the Royal Rumble 1990. This show went down on January 21st, 1990 at the Orlando Arena in Orlando, Florida. And this was a great looking building. It was kind of new at the time. I think it was only built recently at the time of this pay-per-view, and they packed it out. I think the official attendance for this was somewhere around 16,000, but it looked like a lot more. It looked no less than 20,000 visually. It was awesome. Interesting announce team for this as well. We had Tony Schiavone, a very young Tony Schiavone, and Jesse the Body Ventura on the call. So it was a two-man booth here. I don't remember Schiavone being around very long after this. I don't recall exactly when he went back to WCW, but he wasn't around for WrestleMania 6, and this was the Royal Rumble just a couple of months prior to that, so Schiavone was literally 1 foot out the door around the time of this pay-per-view. But it was kind of fun to see him and Jesse together. That's a unique and different commentary team that we don't get too much of. They've only worked a couple of shows together, I think in WWF and WCW, so it was interesting. I mean, it wasn't as good as Bobby and Gorilla. It wasn't as good as Jesse and Gorilla, but it was still entertaining to me. I thought the two did a good job together on the call. I'll run through the card here pretty much in order, and in the early days of these Royal Rumbles, things were just different. They had a lot of matches on the undercard before they got to the Royal Rumble. And if you guys remember, the first 3 years of the pay-per-view Royal Rumble, 89, 90, and 91, there was nothing at stake. There was just bragging rights at stake. If you won the Royal Rumble, you just won the Royal Rumble. It didn't mean you got a title shot, doesn't mean you're the number one contender, doesn't mean shit. It was basically like a battle royal that was just structured differently, like an inverted battle royal where guys come in one at a time and there was nothing at stake. But a couple of years later, when Hogan and Undertaker had their thing and Jack Tunney stripped Hogan of the title and they were going to hold the title up, and the winner of the Royal Rumble in 1992 got to become champion, which we know was won by Ric Flair. I did a watch along for that show last year. Like I said, the link is right there in the upper right if you want to see my reaction to that match. But after Ric Flair won the title in 92, you couldn't really go back to just having nothing at stake in 1993. And that was the year where they started making the winner of the Royal Rumble the new number one contender and would challenge the champion in the main event of WrestleMania. That all started in 1993. But back in these days, in 1990, it didn't mean anything. There was nothing at stake. You just got to celebrate if you won the Royal Rumble, and that was it. Now, this was only the second year it was on pay-per-view. They did a dry run on the USA Network in 1988, and then in 1989 was the first pay-per-view. Big John Studd, the returning Big John Studd, won that match as a babyface in WWE. Here we are 1 year later, and we got a lot of big names in this thing, a lot of big names. So I can't wait to talk about this Rumble and some of the entrants and some of the eliminations and some of the showdowns that we saw. It was a lot of fun, but we got to go through some of these matches first. This was a very weak undercard, in my opinion. I mean, it really was, but I have a lot of memories of these matches and these feuds and where a lot of these stars were at the time. The first match on the show was the fabulous, because they were fabulous, Rougeau brothers taking on the Bushwhackers. Now, again, this is another team that literally I feel like had 1 foot out of the WWE. I don't know the exact dates. I don't know when the Rougeau brothers took off and left and went away for a while, or at least Jacques did. But I know they weren't around for WrestleMania 6. You know, like I said, just like the same thing with Tony Schiavone. But here they are working the Royal Rumble. Now, the previous year, way back at WrestleMania 5, the Rougeaus actually worked with the Bushwhackers. If I remember, my memory is hazy, but there was a story to that match, had something to do with the Bolsheviks. Bushwhackers came in, started feuding with the Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks left or something happened. Whatever it was supposed to lead to a match between the Bushwhackers and the Bolsheviks at WrestleMania 5. That didn't happen. Rougeaus were put in their place, and the Bushwhackers beat them. So Rougeaus already got beat by the Bushwhackers back at WrestleMania. Here we are at the Royal Rumble in a rematch. Typical Bushwhackers match, all sorts of crazy shit going on. Jimmy Hart is taking a pounding out there, and he's running around. Eventually, I think they wind up hitting Jacques or one of them with the battering ram, and they beat the Rougeaus, and I think the Rougeaus were gone after this. Jacques was even sporting the beard. He looked good with the beard on his face, and he would be gone for, I don't know, maybe a year, year and a half before he would resurface as the Mountie. Probably just a year. I'd say 1 year. He was on the shelf, could have been less, and they repackaged him as the Mountie. And then Ray Rougeau didn't do much else with WWE other than coming in and out and being a backstage interviewer. He currently does the French announcing sometimes for pay-per-views on WWE, and I've always been a Ray Rougeau mark, legit tough guy, legit badass, and I never get tired of seeing him. I thought he was awesome, but this was kind of the end of the Rougeau brothers in WWE. I liked the tag team. I liked them as baby faces, and I liked them as heels, because when they moved from Quebec to Montreal, or I'm sorry, from Quebec to Tennessee, or Memphis, or wherever the hell they moved, I thought it was funny how they were all American boys, and they had the theme song. I mean, Jacques Rougeau liked to sing his theme songs. He did it with the Rougeau brothers, and then he would do it with the Mountie later on. So it was kind of like Jacques' thing. The Rougeau brothers, even though they never had a run with the tag belts, I thought they were an entertaining team, a lot more than the Bushwhackers. I was never a really big Bushwhackers fan. Maybe a Sheepherders fan, but not much of a Bushwhackers fan ever. The next matchup, another weak one. This was Brutus the Barber Beefcake taking on the Genius Lanny Poffo. Now, Brutus was right on the cusp of a feud with Mr. Perfect, and he was right off of the heels of the feud with Randy Savage and Zeus. As a matter of fact, I think it was like Christmas Day or Christmas Eve They had the big match that was taped, a big steel cage match, Brutus and Hogan versus Savage and Zeus, and that was the end of Zeus and WWE, and they would release that match on one of the super tape cassettes that's actually right over my head on my shelf. So Brutus was just off of that, and now they were going to be moving him in to a match with Mr. Perfect, or a feud with Mr. Perfect, and the two would work with each other at WrestleMania. But here we are at the Royal Rumble, and for some reason, Brutus is working with the Genius. This was a double disqualification after Earl Hebner took a bump, and I think both guys used a chair. Match was thrown out, double DQ, but after the match, Brutus continues the attack, puts the Genius in the sleeper hold, knocking him out, and then starts giving him a haircut, which is what Brutus used to do back in the day. He starts cutting the top of Lanny's hair, which is hilarious, and that's when Mr. Perfect runs in with a chair and goes to town on Brutus's ribs with a chair and just assaults the shit out of him. And the announcers are going crazy. Tony Schiavone's freaking out, and Jesse's like, that's what Brutus gets. You know, he tries to knock somebody out and take advantage of them and cut their hair, and now you're going to complain that he's getting his ass kicked? Jesse Ventura was right. Brutus deserved for Curt Hennig to come in there and wear him out with that chair. So that would set up their big match at WrestleMania that Brutus would win, because up until that point, they were billing Mr. Perfect as undefeated, although he had already worked with Hogan. You know, he was working out with him on Saturday Night's Main Event, and I know on the house show Loop a lot, and I'm certain that they had matches together, and I'm certain Hogan beat him, but they were still kind of billing Perfect, because none of that shit happened on TV. They were still kind of billing him as undefeated. So when he went into WrestleMania and took that loss to Brutus, that was a big deal. And of course, right after that, when Hogan and Warrior would unify the titles, they would strip Warrior of the Intercontinental title, put the title up in a tournament, and Mr. Perfect would win that. So Perfect had a big 1990, and this was one of his better moments, beating up Brutus, but WrestleMania 6 was one of his dark moments, losing to that fucking guy. Next up, we had a backstage interview with Sean Mooney and the Heenan family. Well, a couple of members. I think it was Rick Rude, Haku, and Andre the Giant. And Mooney, I kind of forgot how funny he is. He was really playing the role of Mean Gene well. He was trying to stir up shit between the Heenan family. You know, he's like, well, Rude, what if you're the last one in there with Haku? And Rude's like, well, I'm going to do what I have to do. And Mooney's like, hey, Haku, did you hear that? He said he's going to do what he has to do. And then Bobby Heenan has to step in and cool everybody off. So very funny interview with Sean Mooney. And I kind of forgot how entertaining that guy could be. Check out his podcast, by the way, if you have not yet. It's a fun one. We then go back to the ring. We've got another match. This was an I Quit match. One of the first submission matches in WWE I had ever seen. I think we had a couple in NWA by this point, but not many in the WWE. So they were billing this as an I Quit match. Greg the Hammer Valentine versus Rugged Ronnie Garvin. Now, Garvin had come in the previous year, started a feud with Greg Valentine, and Valentine, I keep mentioning WrestleMania 6, and the fact that Schiavone was on his way out the door, the Rougeaus were gone right after this, but so was this version basically of Greg the Hammer Valentine, because he would then go on to form Rhythm and Blues with the Honky Tonk Man, and they would do the deal at WrestleMania 6 where Diamond Dallas Page drove him to the ring in the pink Cadillac, and they had the song and the whole deal, and that would last for a while. So this was really the end of Valentine as we knew him up until this point. He was wearing like the shin guard like you would wear in soccer. He was wearing that around his leg for months because of an injury, and it basically gave him an unfair advantage when putting the figure four on an opponent. It made it much more painful, added leverage, whatever. It was basically illegal, but he was getting away with it. So Ronnie Garvin shows up with the same thing on his leg, and he was calling his shin guard the Hammer Jammer, which I thought was hilarious. So Garvin's got the Hammer Jammer on, and Valentine's got his deal on. It's basically figure four leg lock against the reverse figure four leg lock, better known as the Scorpion Deathlock, better known as the Sharpshooter. That was the finisher and the submission hold that Ronnie Garvin was using at the time. Now, we find out what Garvin's motivation was for wearing the brace later on in the match when Valentine hooks him in the figure four and Garvin is just impervious to it. Now, if anybody's ever been put in the figure four leg lock, there is no way that having that shin guard would provide you that much relief from the pain, but Garvin is literally laughing as Valentine has him in the figure four. He's laughing in Valentine's face, basically rendering Greg the Hammer Valentine's figure four leg lock useless. You fast forward later on to the match, brilliant Jimmy Hart. Jesse Ventura puts over how smart this guy is huge, as Ronnie Garvin and Greg Valentine are both down on the mat, kind of near the ropes. Jimmy Hart slides under the bottom rope and he takes off Ronnie Garvin's shin guard. So he removes it from his leg. Very smart move by Jimmy Hart. And then Garvin would counter that by taking off Valentine's leg brace. So now it's all even. It's one-on-one. Garvin versus Valentine. Valentine, I think, puts him back in the figure four. He reverses it. Eventually, Garvin is able to lock Greg the Hammer Valentine in the reverse figure four or the sharpshooter, and Valentine gives up, and Ronnie Garvin wins. The crowd goes nuts because this was a long time coming. Right before this was when, I believe, because and another thing, that's so funny how I keep saying this, Garvin was also out the door after this. By the time, I don't know how many times I've said this already in this review, but by the time we would get to WrestleMania 6, Garvin wasn't there either. And prior to this, they had done like a loser leave town match or a loser is fired match that Valentine won. I think that was because Garvin needed some surgery and he returned as a referee, fucking with Valentine, officiating his matches, and that led to this blow off at the Royal Rumble. So right after this, Valentine would change gimmicks and Garvin would be back, I guess, to WCW or wherever he went next. So yeah, a lot of these matches were kind of pointless because they would have no bearing on the future. All these guys were gone. Next up, we had a backstage interview with Mr. Perfect. He's explaining himself and explaining why he attacked Brutus Beefcake, basically just echoing what Jesse was saying earlier on in the show. And this is the situation. This is one of these situations where the heel is right. You know, looking at this when I was watching this pay-per-view back last night, making my notes, I'm like, Brutus is a dick. He deserved to get assaulted with that chair. And then Mean Gene goes on to ask him what number he drew because they were drawing all the numbers back then. And Perfect said that he drew the perfect number, which of course is number 30. So pretty cool interview there with Mr. Perfect. Next up, we had a Brother Love segment. Now this was right in the middle of the Macho Man Randy Savage, Sensational Sherry, or Macho King and Queen Sherry, and Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire feud. They had been kind of going at it a little bit, and you could see that a feud was on the horizon, and Brother Love is out there with Sensational Sherry. They bring out Sapphire. She comes out there. They start fat-shaming her. They start insulting her, poking fun at her, calling her a peasant, making fun of Dusty. Like, what could he possibly see in you? None of this shit ages well at all watching it back. And finally, Sapphire, just has enough, just slaps the shit out of Sensational Sherry. Randy Savage runs out to the ring, gets in Sapphire's face. Dusty Rhodes runs out there and attacks. Big brawl, big pull apart. And, you know, that was going to be the big setup, you know, for the mixed tag match, the first ever mixed tag match at WrestleMania 6 with Savage and Sherry against Sapphire and Dusty. So pretty good segment there, setting up that whole thing. Bruce Pritchard was absolutely hilarious as Brother Love back in these days. He's getting all involved, and he always sided with the heels, and he was always such a dick. Very entertaining segment, this whole thing. Another kind of pointless, meaningless match that meant nothing in terms of where they were creatively or storyline at the time, but we did have Hacksaw Jim Duggan taking on the Big Bossman. Another disqualification, second one on the undercard here. Duggan won via DQ after Bossman used the nightstick on him. So disqualification there. I think the match went about 6 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, something like that. Very fast, very pointless, and nothing really to say about it at all. We are now on to the Royal Rumble. Back in these days, I loved the Royal Rumble because they would do these like pre-Rumble comments from all of the stars, or maybe not all, but a good portion of them, or at least maybe the meat of the Royal Rumble, the big stars, would cut a little 30-second promo backstage, and they would air all of these back to back. And one of the wrestlers that had one of these backstage promos was the Ultimate Warrior, which again goes back to me not understanding how. I did not see this coming. I must not have been paying attention, especially when the Ultimate Warrior is calling out Hulk Hogan, mentioning his name in his promo. You know, why would they do that if they weren't going to have these guys come together? And with WrestleMania 6 being on the horizon and it being in a dome, filling out, you know, hopefully 60, 70,000 fans, you're going to have to put a match in the main event that's going to draw that many people. So to me, looking back in hindsight, all of the signs were pointing to a Hogan and Warrior confrontation. But in those days, those big babyface matches is not something you really saw. So I don't know. I was just fucking clueless to the fact that these two guys were going to collide in just a little bit in the Royal Rumble. Royal Rumble match kicks off. Interesting referees on the outside of the ring. We had Joey Morella, son of a Gorilla Monsoon, who unfortunately would just pass away about 4 years after this. Dangerous Danny Davis, who was reinstated, no longer a wrestler, no longer a heel. He's back to being a regular referee. And good old Shane O'Mac was the third man, or the third referee on the outside of the ring, so I thought that was interesting. Ted DiBiase, who the year before had purchased the 30th spot, I believe, from Akeem or One Man Gang, whatever he was at the time, Akeem, he would have been, or he purchased it from Slick and came in at number 30. Karma rammed a baseball bat up his ass because this year he comes out at number 1. Ted DiBiase starts the whole thing off. Coco Beware is number 2, and the Royal Rumble kicks off, and Ted pretty quickly gets rid of Coco. So Coco's out on his ass just like that. Marty Jannetty comes out third. He's also eliminated by Ted DiBiase. Jake the Snake Roberts comes down at number 4. Big showdown with Ted DiBiase. These two guys were starting to begin their feud as well. That would eventually involve the big Bossman and his babyface turn. And of course, the big match between Jake and Ted DiBiase at WrestleMania for the $1 Million belt. So Jake hits the ring, starts beating the shit out of the $1 Million Man. Macho Man Randy Savage would come out 5th, and this was so interesting to me. You know, the Macho King runs down to the ring. He attacks Jake Roberts, who's working over Ted DiBiase, and Randy Savage has very interesting history with both of these guys. He used to be in a bitter feud with the $1 Million Man back in '88. $1 Million Man was the man that he beat in the finals of the WrestleMania 4 tournament for the title and would go on to feud with him and Andre alongside Hogan. So Savage has a lot of history with $1 Million Man, and he would go on to have a lot of history with Jake the Snake Roberts 2 years later when Jake brought out the Cobra at the wedding and Savage had to get reinstated in that whole dirty, vicious feud that involved Jake slapping Elizabeth, and he turned into such a dirty heel. But he's a babyface here, getting attacked by a heel Macho Man, but a couple of years later, it would be the complete opposite. All of fans would be firmly behind, you know, Randy Savage in his feud with Jake the Snake Roberts, and to see Macho Man and $1 Million Man working together was also kind of weird given their history. So I really enjoyed that little threesome there, you know, going at each other, considering how much history is involved between those three guys. Rowdy Roddy Piper comes out at number 6. This was awesome. So this basically made it 2-on-2. Jake and Piper versus $1 Million Man and the Macho Man. That was a lot of fun. Warlord came out at number 7. Bret Hart came out at number 8, and Bad News Brown came out at number 9. Dusty would show up as the 10th entrant and immediately go after Savage and eliminate him. He went right after Savage. They had the big brawl on the Brother Love show, you know, a couple of segments before this. Dusty hits the ring, beats the shit out of Savage, and gives him one of those awesome backdrops that Savage just sold and took so marvelously, flying right over the top rope, landing to the floor. Savage is gone. We had Andre the Giant, one half of the tag team champions. Him and Haku had just defeated on TV like the week before, like really close to this. They had defeated Demolition for the tag team titles, and they would go on to face Demolition and drop the tag belts to them at WrestleMania as well. And this was cool to see Andre, because this was the end of Andre, at least in WWE. He worked the match at WrestleMania, but that was it. Aside from making an appearance in Japan and maybe doing another match here or there, Andre was pretty much done around this point. And I remember when I was watching this, making my notes, I thought that they had kind of missed an opportunity here, because one thing I think I would have really liked to see as a fan in terms of Andre is to, and I know Andre hadn't gone babyface yet. He would turn babyface at WrestleMania. He was still a heel, so maybe it wouldn't have worked out, but I would have liked to see Andre and Hogan, you know, together one more time in the ring. And I thought it would have been cool if they like teamed up and eliminated somebody together, or maybe had one final confrontation where maybe they were exchanging some blows. As a fan, I would have loved it had they been in the ring at the same time together, because Andre and Hogan, after their feud that lasted through the mid part of 1988, they didn't really have any sort of contact at all. And considering their history and how far back their feud and their friendship went. I mean, they were feuded when Hogan was a heel. They were friends when Hogan was a babyface, and then Andre turned heel, and they had the big match at WrestleMania 3. I think it would have been cool if they had something to do with each other in this match. Maybe Hogan even eliminates Andre, just for old time's sake or something. So, as a fan, I would have liked to see that. Andre eliminated the Warlord, this big-ass Warlord, with one hand, just throws him right over the top rope. Really funny watching Bobby the Brain Heenan and Mr. Fuji get into it as well. That was great and had me laughing my ass off. We had the Red Rooster came out at number 12. Roddy Piper and Bad News Brown would set up their WrestleMania match in the Royal Rumble as well. Piper eliminates Bad News Brown. Bad News Brown gets pissed, hops back up on the apron, and pulls Roddy Piper out of the ring as well, and the two of them brawl all the way to the backstage area. So that would set up the big match at WrestleMania 6, where Piper painted half of his body black, something that is still very strange to this day when you look back on it, but that was the end of Piper and Bad News in the Rumble. After Piper and Bad News Brown were done, we had the rest of the Colossal Connection and Demolition hit the ring. We had Axe out at number 13. We had Haku out at number 14 and Smash out at number 15. And Demolition would eventually end up eliminating Andre the Giant with a double clothesline. And like I said, they would go on to WrestleMania to win the titles from the Colossal Connection. And the year prior to this, in 89, they were number 1 and 2, Axe and Smash, which was very cool to see back in the day. We had Akeem, the African Dream, out at number 16. We had Dusty Rhodes eliminating Bret Hart, which no one caught, because there was so much going on with Demolition eliminating Andre that nobody saw Dusty toss Bret Hart out. So poor Bret was eliminated very unceremoniously. Jesse recognized it, though. He goes, hey, I think Bret Hart was thrown out. That sucks. And like I said, it would have been cool to see Hogan and Andre that one last time before Andre was sent out of the Royal Rumble, and that would basically be the end of Andre in any sort of Battle Royal ever. I don't know if he ever worked another Battle Royal in his short couple of months there that he was still in the ring. I don't think he did. So yeah, kind of an end of an era here with Andre the Giant. A bunch of guys were out next. Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Dino Bravo, The Earthquake, Jim Neidhart, all came out. The Earthquake was eliminated by about 5 guys, I think. Neidhart, Haku, Smash, Snuka, DiBiase, a bunch of them had ganged up on Earthquake and eliminated him. The Ultimate Warrior came out at number 21. He immediately went after Dino Bravo. They were locked in a feud, and I remember at the time thinking that Bravo might win the Intercontinental title. I actually thought he would be the guy to maybe defeat the Warrior. I thought they were headed for a WrestleMania match. But that wouldn't be the case. They would wrap up their feud way before WrestleMania. Ultimate Warrior eliminated Dino Bravo in this Royal Rumble. We had Rick Martel, Tito Santana, and the Honky Tonk Man coming out as the next 3 entrants. Ultimate Warrior finally eliminated Ted DiBiase. I believe he went about 45 minutes, maybe 44 minutes, something like that. So a really good showing by DiBiase entering at number 1. The Immortal Hulk Hogan came out at number 25. And there was a lot of guys in the ring, and 2 of those guys were Hogan and Warrior. Hogan would then go on to eliminate Jimmy Snuka, his old pal, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Haku, and the Honky Tonk Man. The Ultimate Warrior would eliminate Shawn Michaels. Now, Shawn Michaels came in and was like out in a matter of seconds. He had like no time in the Rumble at all, really close to a record. I think he wasn't in Warlord, Bushwhacker, Luke, or Santino Marella category, but he was damn close. Michaels did not last long at all in this Royal Rumble. And after Shawn was eliminated by the Warrior, Martel was eliminated by the Warrior, leaving only Hogan and Warrior in the ring. And they have their backs turned to each other, and the fans start standing up, just watching the fans like stand up going, holy shit. Tony Schiavone's freaking out, going, look at this. And these 2 behemoths kind of turn around and lock eyes with each other, and it was a great moment. This little guy right here, this fan in 1990, was shitting his pants. I couldn't believe what we were seeing. You know, this was epic. You have to appreciate. And I'm no huge fan of the Warrior or Hogan, okay? And I will do a This Day in History on April 1st on the 30th anniversary of their WrestleMania match. I will do a This Day in History of that match over WrestleMania season. So stay tuned for that in a couple of months. That was a big match. And for them to set it up this way in the Royal Rumble, I don't know, maybe it's just the way TV and the way creative was done at that time. It's not the way they did things. I was trying to think up until that point how many babyface matches I saw. I saw a couple. In like the mid-card level in WWE. I want to say like Tito Santana and like a babyface Shane Douglas or something like that worked an undercard of a primetime show on the USA Network or something. It was so fucking rare. So you have Warrior and Hogan, Intercontinental Champion, World Heavyweight Champion, coming face to face. And they go at it for a little bit. I didn't really like it. Was the shoulder tackle and nobody moved, and then another shoulder tackle and nobody moved really, even though Warrior was backed up a ton. They then do the crisscross, which I just hate that in the ring. They crisscross a little bit. I think Hogan goes down onto his stomach. Warrior jumps over him. They both get back up and nail each other with a double clothesline. So they are out cold in the ring. Now, this same spot they would do at WrestleMania, You know, they would do the test of strength. Each guy would body slam the other one. Each guy would shoulder tackle the other one. And they would do the crisscross thing, the double clothesline, the whole deal. And that was all started here. So that's all they gave us. That little tiny taste of no physicality at all. 2 shoulder tackles and a double clothesline is all we got. But it was enough to keep the fans on the edge of their seat, to have them shitting their pants. They cannot see, they cannot believe, I should say, the confrontation that they are witnessing before their eyes right now. And like I said, my dumb ass self, for some reason, not being able to see the future here, not realizing that this is leading to a WrestleMania match. I think even when it happened, I didn't understand that that's what they were doing, that they were setting up the big main event at WrestleMania 6 in front of 70,000 fans. It wasn't until a couple of weeks after, the next week on TV, when Hogan and Warrior would team up on Saturday night's main event, and they would have the miscommunication, and that's when the match was made officially for WrestleMania, the Ultimate Challenge, champion versus champion, title for title. And I got to say, I got to give credit to the Ultimate Warrior, to Hulk Hogan, and to the WWE. I thought as a fan, it was impossible to have a bigger main event than Ultimate Warrior than Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3. Pontiac Silverdome, I was there. I saw the body slam. 93,000 people, biggest match in professional wrestling history. Here we are a mere 3 years later, and even though it wasn't quite on the level of Hogan and Andre, for that time, it was damn close. I mean, Hogan and Warrior was a dream match, and it was one we hadn't seen before, where during the build to Hogan and Andre, they tried to make you think that these guys hadn't worked before, but Hogan and Andre had a long history, where Hogan and Warrior didn't have a history at all. So it really was an interesting match, and it got my brain moving, my wheels spinning. I'm like, how are they going to do this? Because at WrestleMania 3, I could visualize Hogan and Andre. I had seen that before, but I have never seen Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. And to top it all off, Warrior's not turning on Hogan, joining up with Bobby the Brain Heenan to make the match a hero versus a villain. This is hero versus hero. This is Batman versus Superman. This is a big deal in 1990. And for them to kick it off here in the Royal Rumble led to one of my favorite WrestleManias of all time. Hogan and Warrior did a good job in that main event. 8 years later, they would completely shit the bed at Halloween Havoc 1998. By the way, if you want to see and listen to my review of that pay-per-view, I just did it back in October. The link is also in the upper right of the screen if you want to see the second time Hogan and Warrior got together in the late 90s in WCW and how bad that was. But for this time, everybody pulled it off well. WWE set the stage here at the Royal Rumble brilliantly. The match went well. The setting, WrestleMania main event, huge crowd like that, not quite as big as WrestleMania 3, but very close. Big epic confrontation, and the match wasn't bad. And that is so amazing considering how shitty of wrestlers Hogan and the Warrior were known to be at times. So this was all pulled off marvelously. So anyway, back to the Royal Rumble. You know, these two superheroes collide. They double clothesline each other. They're flat on their backs. And that's when, I think it was Barbarian that was out next. Barbarian came out, and he basically just had free pickings to both these guys who were laying on the ground, and he just started putting the boots to both of them. Ravishing Rick Rude would come out next, and the ring started to fill up a little bit again, and they would do something similar to what they did the year before in 1989 when Hogan played a role. I mean, Hogan is such a shithead. You know, he is always a sore loser. In 1989, he was a sore loser when he got thrown out and came back in the ring. He helped eliminate Randy Savage. In 1992, he threw a fucking fit and pulled out Psycho Sid. And here we are in 1990, and like a chicken shit little coward, as Rude and the Barbarian are trying to dump the Ultimate Warrior over, Hulk Hogan hits everybody with a running clothesline, hitting Rude and Barbarian, but that pushes Warrior over the edge, and he's eliminated. And Jesse Ventura calls Hogan out right away. Hogan did that shit on purpose. And Shivani's like, come on, he would never do that. He was hitting Rude and Barbarian, and Warrior went out accidentally. And Jesse's like, come on, Shivani, don't be so naive. And Jesse is right. Hogan has a history of this. And it's one of the funniest things about this huge over-the-top babyface Hulk Hogan character when you look back on how he was such a whiny little bitch every time he lost. When he lost to Andre the Giant, when $1 Million Man did the double referee thing, the way he was literally crying tears in the locker room after you lost the belt. Oh my God, blah, blah, blah. Just fucking dust yourself off, asshole. Get back on your horse and challenge for the title again. Don't cry like a bitch, you know? And here he's doing a shady thing, and looking back, I think Hogan did do that on purpose. Jesse's right. He eliminated the Ultimate Warrior on purpose, and Hogan would get what's coming to him in the main event of WrestleMania 6. Hercules Hernandez would come out next. He was also on the verge of turning heel and forming Power and Glory with Paul Roma in just a couple of months. And he was followed by Mr. Perfect, of course, at number 30. So the final three are Mr. Perfect, Rick Rude, and Hulk Hogan after Hercules gets eliminated. So you had the two Minnesota boys, Perfect and Rude, taking on Hulk Hogan. That was your final three. Hogan then eliminates Rick Rude kind of by accident when he throws him into the ropes, but Perfect, who had fallen, spilled out to the outside of the ring, was getting back in the ring, and he pulled the rope down by accident, and Rude tumbled over the top, leaving Mr. Perfect and Hulk Hogan in the ring together. They had kind of had a few matches, you know, on the live events and the house shows, and they had been feuding a little bit around this time. So this would be a theme for the next couple of years in the Royal Rumble, Hogan being the last guy in there with someone he's feuding with. Now, I actually think they should have saved Zeus for the Royal Rumble, and after that match in December, have Zeus be in the Royal Rumble and Zeus and Hogan be the final two, and Hogan throws him over the top, but he was already out the door by that point. It was Mr. Perfect and Hogan in the end, and Hogan eliminating Mr. Perfect. And I always loved the way Mr. Perfect not only sold everything, but sold the way he would like bump over the top rope. Not only did Perfect just go over the top rope for Hogan, he went over the top turnbuckle and ring post. Hogan threw him over the corner, not over the rope, threw him over the corner, and he even landed a little bit on the ring steps below. So props to Mr. Perfect for making Hulk Hogan look like $1 billion, because that's what Mr. Perfect did. And Hulk Hogan celebrates in the end as the winner of the Royal Rumble, goes out to ringside. These fans at ringside had that big Hulk Hogan banner, that Hulkamania Lives Forever banner. He grabbed that up, brought it in the ring, and waved it around. Very famous shot of Hogan doing that. It was even nice enough to fold it back up and hand it back to the audience, which was really cool. So, like I said, back in these days, there was nothing at stake. As a matter of fact, Hulk Hogan was the WWE champion. Here at the Royal Rumble in 2020, it was just announced that Brock Lesnar, the current WWE champion, is going to be in this year's Royal Rumble. And it's only the third time that's happened, if memory serves. 1989, Randy Savage was in the Royal Rumble, and 1990, Hulk Hogan was in the Royal Rumble. But after that, 91, 92, 93, there wasn't a WWE champion in the Royal Rumble again, aside from the first 2 years ever. So that's a pretty big deal for 2020, 30 years after this, 30 years after the last time a WWE champion was in the Rumble, we're getting that again. So Hogan winning the Rumble here as the champion was not a big deal. It just gave Hogan more bragging rights and more momentum, because you knew if Hogan's going to drop the title to the Warrior, he's not going to lose the Royal Rumble too. The way things are booked now, you might have Warrior eliminate Hogan in this Rumble and win the Rumble, and then go on to challenge him and beat him at WrestleMania. But that would have required Hogan to put over Warrior way more than he wanted to, I would assume. So this was probably the compromise. You'll eliminate the Warrior in the Rumble, and you'll win the Rumble, but you're going to drop the belt to him at WrestleMania. So very interesting time back then. And Hogan would go on to win the next year as well. 1991, he would be the winner, and he would last eliminate Earthquake, who he had just wrapped up his feud with the following year. So very similar years here, 1990 and 1991. Aside from the big confrontation between Warrior and Hogan in 1990, those two Royal Rumbles are very similar, in how they're structured and who won and the whole deal. So this is a memorable pay-per-view because of the first time we got the big clash between Warrior and Hogan. And for that time and where wrestling was, tail end of the rock and wrestling, still a lot of kids watching the show, and these big larger-than-life superheroes colliding was a pretty big deal for a fan who might be 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, which is where I was at the time. So my parents, always hooked me up with some of the bigger pay-per-views, and I remember ordering this on pay-per-view and watching it in my living room with my family and absolutely losing my shit when Warrior and Hogan were in there together. Very, very, very memorable. So Hogan wins again, and Hogan must pose, and that is a wrap on the Royal Rumble 1990. Do you guys have any memories of this? Any of you over the age of 30 years old that might remember this pay-per-view or have any memories of it? Please hit me with your memories, or hit me with your opinions, better yet, on this pay-per-view in the comments below. Really interested to see where your opinions lie on this. If you remember it, if you even give a shit about it, if this was important to you, if you understand the significance or the historical significance of this match and what it led to at WrestleMania 6. If any of this is important to you at all as a wrestling fan, I would love to hear your opinions in the comments below or on social media over on the Twitter. So like I said, the next one, for those of you who get really tired of these 1990s reviews, the next one you're going to like a lot more. So keep a lookout for that, probably on like January 19th or 20th, somewhere around there. The next one will be uploaded on YouTube and ready for your viewing enjoyment. So thank you again for sitting through this review and taking this trip down memory lane with me. It is always a blast. It's one of my favorite things to do here on the channel is review classic pay-per-views, and I hope you enjoyed this one. You guys have a great rest of your weekend. I will talk to you very soon on the next podcast or the next pay-per-view review, whichever one comes first. Y'all be good. Peace.